application. So, give you some little factoids that you can spread around during the week.
Is it open?
In 1950, the cartoon comic strip Peanuts first appeared, and Hal Broker for October because of the Great Pumpkin. And also in 1959, on this day, the Twilight Zone aired for the first time. Any of you know which network it was on? No? CBS. Not nobody. Yeah, it's aired on CBS. Nobody keeps track of that anymore because they got all these hundreds of channels on cable. So today is Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. Also the birthday of this guy in the middle, Julius Henry Marx, also known as Groucho. Anyone having a birthday in October? Is anybody's birthday today? Next week, okay, very good, Duncan. We won't ask how old you are because we know it's like just
Yeah, you know.
25 in some months.
You guys know how old I am. I used to hide it, not anymore.
And then also on this day, October 2nd, was the death day, the day that Sam Adams died in 1803. Now, I hope none of us are going to die today or anytime soon. Nawaz Ibrahim is absent. She emailed me to say she sends her regrets. And also Deanne Henderson, who's been coming the last few months, that she's also away today. So is anyone here for the first time? Yeah, okay, Natalie and Martha? Great, good strong female name. John, we met. Lillian is here for the first time, yes, and you learned a story today, didn't you? Yeah. She was here early enough to hear the 3 Billy Goats Gruff. Anyway, if you're here for the first time, you should know that the purpose of the Church of Freethought is using the U.S. Supreme Court's language. Oops, didn't want to show that yet. The Supreme Court's language. Occupying in the life of its members a place parallel to that filled by the other churchgoers. That was from this famous case, Seeger. It had to do with conscientious objectors, and they had to decide were they going to let these guys be conscientious objectors even though they weren't part of an established religious denomination. And they said, well, if it occupies in your life a place parallel to that filled by the people who obviously get the exemption, then you're in. So we just do what the other churches do, as I said, without the supernaturalism, basically church minus supernaturalism, that's what we are. Not that we can't have fun on Halloween coming at the end of this month, and you would think that people would be less scared by people like us who don't believe in ghosts and vampires and witches and werewolves and so on, as well as not believing in deities. And there's more in your bulletin today about that. Take some extra copies, leave those lying around where they might do some good. If you're going to take an airplane flight anywhere, put it in the seat pocket. Somebody else will find it. And of course, they will interpret it as a sign from no God that they're meant to kind of look into the kinds of things that we believe in. And then please email me or post to our Facebook page, especially you, Martha, Natalie, John. When you're here for the first time, we'd like to get your impression as to what you thought of us. Now, this next thing you saw quickly, you know what that's a picture from? In 1692, at this very time of year, something remarkable and important was going on in New England. There was a witch hysteria going on. Now known popularly as the Salem witch trials, the jails were full of people accused of witchcraft. 19 people had already been hanged. One had been pressed to death under stones because he refused to plead. I don't think they do that in the law anymore, John. Okay. There's some French word that refers to this practice that they used to have, and his last words as they were crushing him to death was, "More weight." What a cantankerous fellow. Finally, on October 3rd, that's tomorrow, one of the principal clergymen and president of Harvard College, and the father of Cotton Mather, and his dad was named Increase Mather, the day after today, 1692, he denounced the use of spectral evidence. Spectral evidence is evidence that only the person giving it can see or appreciate. Like, I see demons talking to Paul, so he's a witch and we have to kill him. And they would accept that as evidence, spectral evidence. On October 12th, coming up, which is observed as Freethought Day for the last 20 years or so, this guy here, Governor William Phipps, wrote the Privy Council of William and Mary back in England saying that he had stopped the trials and mentioned, quote, what danger some of their innocent subjects might be exposed to if the evidence of the afflicted persons only did prevail either to the committing or trying of any of them. Those are not misspellings, that's just how they kind of had loose spelling conventions back then. So that's what he's talking about, is spectral evidence. Hmm? Right, persons. That's how smart you had to be governor back then. Of course, there's no reason to think that this guy Phipps was anything but a good Christian. In those days, people were even more fundamentalist than any Christians today, but he did the only thing really that could be done under the circumstances in the face of this escalating out-of-control calamity built entirely on supernatural nonsense. And whereas during efforts to exterminate the Cathars in France in the 13th century, a Cistercian abbot famously said, "Kill them all and let God sort it out," Increase Mather said at the time, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned." And that's actually the root we think of. Is it called Blackstone's Law or something? You know, better that 9 or 99 guilty people go free than that somebody be thrown in jail that shouldn't be. So, worth remembering October 12th, Freethought Day. That's a week from this coming Wednesday. So here's a succinct version of our principles, which we take to be real religion and spirituality. Every single one of these thoughts could and has filled volumes, and they're constantly and continually new and different ways that they apply in real life, and that's what we talk about at church. So many people have devoted considerable time and energy and really just amazing intelligence to the religious outlook that we call Freethought. And as one of our members remarked a few months after joining the NTCUF, David Collins, who's not here today, he said, just with amazement, there really is a lot to atheism. And he was right. Gesundheit. So we have a moment of science today, and then we're going to hear from Freethought Robinson, who's here. Freethought was associated with the NTCUF in the late 1990s, and then she went away, got a bachelor's in psychology and a master's degree in counseling, and a husband and 2 kids, boy and girl. No more on the way or planned.
No.
So, 2 are plenty. Anyway, she has a counseling practice in Burleson. She's going to talk to us about something really scary, the complexities of communication. And then next month, our service is November 6th. That's going to be a long 5 weeks. You know, sometimes we're 4 weeks apart, sometimes 5 weeks. 5 weeks this time, so you'll be just dying to get another dose of Freethought by then. And at that time, we're going to consider things to be thankful for. This was Rusty's idea, actually. He wanted to have subjects for the services, and I couldn't think of anything, so he just came up with things to be afraid of for this month, because it's October and Halloween, and then things to be thankful for next month. And then, of course, with Christmas, Mythmas after that. So thanks, Rusty, although he's homesick today. Something about no God had it in for us or something. So please check out our website at churchoffreethought.org. Rusty and Sarah Nadel are also working on getting the YouTube channel working. There's some things up there. John, did they? Are you giving Sarah a drive or something? Or are they going to be able to?
We've been swapping drives
Already
each
been
week.
Swapping that. Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully the YouTube channel will be up, and then there'll be some of our services up on YouTube. We also have a forum under our services section on our website. Post your own ideas. Jokes, there are already some jokes there, and there's a thread on each of our recent past services. So you can comment about that, put in your own comments. You do need to sign up, because that's to keep away the bots. And go to our Facebook page, like us on there, sign up for our Twitter feed. URLs for these things are on the back page of your bulletin. So Sarah's with our young freethinkers today, and it's not just babysitting. And if she did she not want to go and Lily? Oh, they're the boys.
The room's not open.
Well, it's open, but there's nobody to attend to the children.
Oh, okay.
So
Well,
they're
they're behaving themselves. Okay, I thought it was you then. Anyways, we do need more volunteers. We never know how many kids are going to show up and what ages, but that's always kind of a fun thing. If nobody shows up, then come in here. But we do need volunteers to rotate taking on that responsibility. It can be a lot of fun. It's like kind of part caretaker, supervisor, teacher, counselor, and really 100% sharing of yourself with little people who have much to learn about how to be good and thoughtful people. And if we don't teach them, who will? How will they learn that? The next Freethought Book Club is January 14th. That's more than enough time to unwind after the holidays and read this book, Greg Epstein's Good Without God. Epstein is a humanist chaplain at Harvard University. Well, it even says that underneath his name. And again, see today's bulletin for the subject of good and evil, morality, and God belief. And also on our website from 2011, so before he wrote his book, yeah, it's not a copycat. There's a sermon in the services sermon section called Good With and Without Gods. Yeah, take a look at that too. So our moment of science, feeling outnumbered. It's commonly said and probably mentioned at a prior service that for every cell in the human body, there are 10 or 100 times as many microorganisms in and on our bodies, mostly in our intestinal tract. The large bowel is basically a sewer. It's terrible, full of all sorts of nasties. Definitely, what's the federal government, the EPA, doesn't meet their standards. Well, now a couple of Israeli scientists have gone to the trouble of trying to calculate this business, how many cells there are in our body, how many bacteria, what's the ratio. And it turns out that here's this back of the envelope type of calculation that they showed. Because this has been around since like the 1970s. They just took a 100-kilogram guy just to make the calculations easier. So the mass divided by the mass and the size of an individual cell, and they come up with about 10 to the 11 minus 10 to the minus 12 to minus 10 to minus 11 kilogram per cell, and so that we get 10 to the 13 to 10 to the 14 cells, and bacteria more than that. Well, here's their more painstakingly calculated results using the best information about the proportions of different cells and their average numbers based on their sizes and the mass of the tissues in which they're found. So this is the numbers of cells, and what's all that red? That's the calculated number of erythrocytes, or red blood cells. So most of your cells are red blood cells in your blood. 84% of the total number of cells. And look here, the thrombocytes, the thrombocytes are platelets here. Pretty substantial portion as well, probably more than any of the other particular ones. Platelets are the little things in your blood that help your blood clot. Thrombocytes, they're called. On the other hand, when you look at the where the most of the mass of the human body is, well, over half of it is muscle and fat, even though these cells account for only about 0.2% of all the cells in our bodies. And of course, some of this has different proportions of fat and muscle. Hello, David. I just mentioned you before you got here. All good though. So this is, of course, these calculations are based on an idealized human body. You get that? So here's the numbers of cells and then the mass. So red cells are huge numbers of the total cells, but not very much of the total mass. And the bacteria, it turns out, you add 25 and 5, you get 30, and the bacteria about 38 times 10 to the 12. So really, we're pretty evenly matched. It's not like there's many more bacteria than our own cells. Pretty close. And of course, bacteria are so much smaller, that's how we can be big, and the bacteria are basically just a small amount of volume in our bowels, and the smattering on our skin as well. So in their paper, the authors asked, should we care about the absolute number of human cells in the body or the ratio of bacterial to human cells? So what? And they answered, this is going to please you if you're a free thinker, a number widely stated should be based on the best available data. In other words, it's a good point and a noble idea, isn't it? That we should not be tossing around factoids that are really not quite right or that are not based on good facts and reason. These scientists also, in the course of their report, raised some really interesting points. I mean, should red blood cells and platelets even be counted as cells? They don't have any nuclei. They're not dividing. But then, of course, when you look at somebody, nothing on the surface, their skin, that's all dead cells, their hair, dead. Everything you're looking at is not really alive. Most of it, the live stuff is deeper in. And by the way, Paul, I don't know if you remember seeing that thing there. They recalculated, they say that the glia cells are just about as numerous as neurons. They're not, they don't outnumber the neurons as was once thought. So that's, again, they pulled a lot of this recent data together to get that. So what you see on people's skin, those cells are not dividing, not unless it's cancer. And they also brought up some interesting questions about proportion of different types of cells at different ages. So an infant is going to come out different than an adult. And then again, most of our cells, in our cells, are mitochondria. And mitochondria are like independent little bacteria. We have many mitochondria in every one of our cells. Is that really us, or should that be counted with the bacteria? Because they have their own DNA and they divide and multiply on their own under the control of our cells. So it really kind of gets things a little bit mixed up, kind of like, is Pluto really a planet when you start delving into these things? So that's our moment of science. Now, there are a lot of scary things in life, difficult things too, and communication, broadly understood as what we try to get something across to somebody else or what we're trying to receive from them, that can be and often is both scary and dangerous. And when it gets followed up, some bad things can happen. Freethought Robinson is going to get us started thinking about what's important in communication and how to do it, sending and receiving, how to do it better, avoid some pitfalls. Uh-oh. I don't know why I did that. I'll fix it. You got a pocket or something? It's got a little hook on there.
Yeah.
Put that on here. And then that forward arrow, remember how that works, that goes to the next slide, that goes back to the previous slide. So, Freethought Robinson, please welcome her.
All right. Thank you. So, everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good deal. So, I am a counselor, licensed professional counselor, and my experience has been diverse. I have worked with kids in mental hospitals. I've worked with people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. And then I've now moving into private practice and getting the individuals, getting the families, getting the couples. And a lot of times when families and couples come in and sit on my couch, and I say, okay, so how did you know that you needed to see a counselor today? And most of the time, they will invariably say, we need to work on our communication. And communication is something that we all do every day. And it's really what kind of defines us as different from a lot of animals in the animal kingdom, is that we have spoken language and written language. So what about this thing that we do every day, what makes it so difficult? And pretty much, it's the fact that communication takes place between at least two different people. So you have the person who is saying something or trying to get a point across, and that person has their understanding of the material. They have their history, they have their feelings, and that they are trying to get across to another person. Meanwhile, the person who is listening has their own history. They have their own baggage, they have their own feelings, they have to interpret things through their senses. And sometimes the message just gets lost. As far as our senses go, you know, science can tell us how our ears work, how our eyes work, how our olfactory system works. But can it really tell us that the way that I see the color red is the same way that Tim sees the color red? And the other thing about our senses is that they're not, there's the act of sensing something, and then there's the act of interpreting what our senses pick up on. And sometimes it's in the interpretation that the what really happened gets lost. This is where you get, you know, people thinking that they saw a ghost. Well, they didn't see a ghost. They were kind of asleep, not really awake, and the light was coming through the windows kind of weird, and they thought they saw a ghost. They misinterpreted what they saw as a ghost. But they didn't quite interpret things correctly. Kind of strange example, you've ever seen The Others. really great horror movie with Halloween coming up. There's one scene where a woman sees her daughter, but it looks like an old woman is in her daughter's body. And so she freaks out on her daughter. And her daughter, meanwhile, is like, "Are you mad? I am your daughter." So just kind of an example of a miscommunication really kind of caused by a sensory error. Of course, in that case, it's supernatural, which doesn't really happen. But so different people process the same stimuli in different ways. This is why when an accident happens, people give different eyewitness accountings of it. The other thing is what we hear is affected by many different factors. I've already touched on sensory issues. Past experiences can affect what we hear. Kind of in high school, I would get targeted by Christian apologists who were creationists. And I did a lot of debating then. And so pretty much every Christian apologist who was trying to convert me was founding creationism. That's what I was used to debating. Well, in college, I had my first Christian apologist approach me who was not a creationist. And I didn't do such a great job with him because I was filtering everything he said through the creationist lens and fighting him as if he was a creationist. So if, we have in our minds that all people are this way, all people of this religion are this way, all people of this race are this way, all women are this way, all men are this way, then we kind of filter what people from those groups say through that lens of all people are this way without really listening to what they are saying. So the person who is listening has their filters and biases, so they might not be hearing what you're saying accurately. The good news here is that when we are communicating, we can easily restate what somebody is saying. It's like, am I hearing you correctly? And I think how this plays out every day, those of you who have ever been in a relationship knows the feeling of getting into a massive drag-down fight and then later finding out you actually agreed, you just thought your partner disagreed with you. It was all a misunderstanding. Those things aside that can make communication difficult, though, overall I have found that we are actually very good at communicating. The problem often is when we drag our spouse into therapy or when we drag our kids into therapy, is that our spouse, our kids, our parents, or whatever, they know exactly what it is that we want. They just don't like what we're saying. They're not swayed by our logic. So, for instance, if my husband came home and said very nicely to me, "I am very worried about my mother. I think she needs to come live with us," my reaction is going to be this. And there's going to be some violence. So, a lot of times I think that we have in our mind that if we just, and I think this is something that we atheists, free thinkers have, that if we state a very logic and reason case and are very nice, then other people will be swayed by our arguments. The problem is there's arguing from logic and then there's arguing from emotion. And it's really hard to, if you're a person arguing from logic, to win over somebody who's arguing from emotion, because emotion is not so rational. And just getting them to make that leap is really hard. The other part of it, there are other people who decide if they can bully, blackmail, or threaten people, they can get what they want. And if you've ever seen Hocus Pocus, Fun Halloween movie, there was the witch Winifred who decided to kill her boyfriend for cheating on her with her sister, and sewed his mouth shut to keep her secrets. Way of controlling him. He can't talk about her. Well, she resurrects him to do her bidding, so he's a zombie. And as soon as he can, he grabs a knife and slits his mouth open so he can tell her off. So I think that just kind of goes to show that if you're bullying and blackmailing and threatening people, you might feel like you're controlling people, but they're going to find a way to fight back ultimately. And then of course, if you recognize that movie, that just goes with the bullying blackmail stuff. But so some truths to accept is that there's no magic bullet to make other people do what we want and agree with us. We can only control our behavior. We cannot control anyone else. And that's just something that we have to accept about our humanity. We can't control that the person driving in front of us is going 10 miles below the speed limit. We can't control what our friends do. We can't control what our spouses do. We can't even control what our children do. We can just control what we do. And there's something frustrating about this, but there's also something very liberating about this because we're not responsible for everyone. You don't have to put so much effort into making other people do what you want. You can focus on you and bettering yourself and what you're going to do. You don't have to carry the weight of what other people are doing with you. However, while having good communication skills doesn't mean you can control others and make them do what you want, you can get ahead by having better communication skills. And for an example, and also for something that is scary, check out Monday's presidential debate if you haven't, for a good example of how different communication styles can either win people, not everyone, but can win people over or turn some people, once again, not everyone, off. So first, to get better at communicating, we have to understand ourselves well. We have to understand our baggage and cognitive distortions that we fall into. And there are a lot of cognitive distortions. I'm just going to go through a few, but pretty much cognitive distortions are things that we think about ourselves and about the world that are not very logical. And we all have cognitive distortions. It's not a bad thing in so much because we do all have them, but it's good to know about them and be aware of them and know when we're falling into that way of thinking. We have cognitive distortions because those cognitive distortions help us survive childhood pretty much, but they might not work so well for us as an adult. And one is personalization, which is kind of thinking that everything that happens is because of something that I do. And I kind of got a picture from The Wicker Man here, where a police officer goes to an island that is run by a pagan cult. And everyone as a group manipulates him into becoming a human sacrifice. And, there's just, the leader has tremendous power. And while cult leaders do have a lot of power over their followers, it's not absolute power like that. There are dissenters from cults, people who try, within the cult who try to break free. And further, people outside the cult are not so easy to manipulate. This is kind of one of those movies that bothered me because rarely do, if you line up so many dominoes, do they fall in place that easily. And it's the same with thinking that, on the personal level, thinking that everything happens because of something we do. From people who say, oh, your grandmother got better because I prayed for her. Well, most likely she got better because she had good care at the hospital. That person posted something on Facebook that was because of something that I posted on Facebook. Maybe they did, or maybe they didn't. You don't know. Or I think we see a lot of this happening when we're driving. somebody starts driving in a erratic way, and you might wonder if it's because they're trying to race us or cut us off, or that they're doing things deliberately. We don't know. It could have been because of something we did, or it might not. But once again, just kind of to be aware that we can't read minds, which leads into the next one, jumping to conclusions. And this works several different ways. One is believing that you know what other people are thinking about you. Anyone in here psychic? Yeah. So we don't know what other people are thinking about us. If you hear a lot of people, I absolutely know this is what this person is thinking about me. How do you know? How do you know that person just did not have a bad day? Something that my husband and I do, if one of us is silent and moody, is ask, is it me? And the other one is free to say no, and I'm not ready to talk about it right now. And then we let it alone. When they're ready to talk, when one of us is ready to talk, we will. But sometimes people just get in a bad mood, and you might think that somebody is mad at you or upset with you, and it's not, they're just having a bad day, and they're not ready to talk about it yet. The other part of this goes into believing that you know the reasons that people act the way they do. And I see this a lot of times with parents and their children. My son has autism, and I started getting notes home from his pre-K teacher that he was being defiant, and I asked, well, that doesn't tell me a lot. What was he doing? She said he was sitting on the floor during transitions. Well, if you know a lot about autism, kids with autism, when they have transitions, they get overwhelmed by it, and they tend to sit on the floor. He wasn't being defiant, it was a sign he was overwhelmed. So, and I notice a lot of times when people believe they know the reasons people act like they do, it's always very negative. Unless somebody is telling you that they are doing this, you don't know the reasons that other people are acting the way they do. Black and white thinking. It's either this or this. This is when somebody will come and say, oh, I got, 7 A's on my report card, and then I got 1 F, I'm a failure. And, well, just because you got 1 F does not mean you're a failure. Or, I always mess up because of this one thing that happened, and they don't remember all the things that they did well. And I can tell everyone, and Tori did something right this morning because you got here safely. So you pretty much did the most dangerous thing you will do today, which is get into a car and drive. Auto accidents are the second leading cause of death in the U.S. And got here safely. So everyone in this room did something well today. And we have the Wizard of Oz, where you had the good witch who was all good and loving and wonderful, and then the bad witch who was evil. And then a few years ago, we had Wicked come out, where the good witch wasn't quite so goody-goody, and the bad witch, she wasn't as bad as we thought. There are shades of gray. And just forgetting about those shades of gray, and not realizing that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and it's okay, kind of feels that distortion. Blaming. And kind of going through your life and figuring out who is to blame for ruining it. We really need to focus on what is in our life that we need to change. Spending a lot of time figuring out who's to blame. Things are just really staying the same. Nothing's changing. You're stuck spinning your wheels if you're focusing on the blame. So for effective communication, be aware of your baggage. If you're wanting to communicate something important to your spouse, and you know that it's going to be emotionally laden, be aware of the fact that that emotion might be influencing you a bit. Be aware if something's a hot button topic for you. Be respectful. When I was working with substance users, this was a population, they did not want to be there. They either had CPS cases and they had to get their children back, or they were on parole or probation, so they were not happy about being there. So even though they weren't very nice at first, by treating them with respect, I could eventually form a therapeutic relationship with them. And I will also say from the other side, it was easier for me to form that therapeutic relationship with the people who came in and were respectful than the ones who were cussing me and everyone else out, just because that does get you angry. When we speak to people, we want to make sure we're using I more than we are you. And so, suppose you get home from work, you're tired, you've had a long day, and your partner comes in and goes, "You didn't do the dishes." How are you feeling? Most people are feeling on the defensive. And when we feel when we're feeling defensive, when we feel like somebody is attacking us, we go from logic mode into emotion mode, and tends to be a big fight starts. However, if your partner comes home and says, "I'm a bit disappointed that the dishes aren't done," you're still probably not going to be happy, but you're able to take a step back, or at least not feeling as attacked. Have a sense of humor. That goes a long way to diffusing a tense situation, bringing in a bit of laughter. And once again, avoid blame. When you're wanting to focus a problem, like going back, my husband came home and said that he wanted his mother to live with us. Well, there might be a problem that she's old and can't take care of herself anymore, but we want to avoid blame, you just don't like her, da-da-da-da, well, she's just a mean lady, da-da-da-da. We want to avoid blame so that we can figure out a good solution. Because once again, when you're focusing on blame, nothing's changing, the problem isn't getting fixed. And I've just found, I'm not trying to find the blame here, I'm trying to find the solution, tends to focus things well. And the other thing is just surround yourself with the right people. We're not going to get along with everyone. It's not a realistic expectation to expect that you will get along with everyone. And if somebody is leaving you feeling drained or frustrated every time you see them, you might just want to limit your contact with them or hang out with other people. Now, for somebody who has 100 friends, this is pretty easy. But for somebody who finds that people are more often leaving them behind and they don't have a lot of people in their social group, and they're also having a hard time at work, it might be worth it to explore what's going on here. And you can ask people, but it also goes back to the you can't control them. They might be honest with you. Some people are okay with being blunt. Other people not so much, or they might not be able to, they might be worried about hurting your feelings. The other thing to keep in mind is there's a lot of people who went through school and really, schools are not really good at screening for different disorders, who grew up to become adults with disorders such as autism spectrum disorder and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And both of these disorders are marked with difficulties socializing. Most likely in this room, if anyone's affected by anything, would be autism spectrum disorder, because a lot of atheists also tend to have autistic tendencies. So pretty much somebody with autism spectrum disorder gets very overwhelmed in social situations. They tend to like quieter one-on-one interactions. Tend to have a hard time figuring out conversations, how to break the ice with people. And when they have, the workplace accommodations for them are very easy, but employers often just don't understand them. They often tend to be very good workers for several reasons. And in fact, this computer and pretty much a lot of this technology in this room is thanks to people with autism spectrum disorder. You have a lot of really smart people on the spectrum, but they have that difficulty socializing. And when my mom used to work in human resources, and there was one employee who they moved her from department to department doing customer service, billing type jobs, and she was always getting overwhelmed and having a hard time with it, and they tested her and found out that she was on the autism spectrum, and they moved her to a more paperwork, filing-oriented job, and she started to thrive there. But she told my mother that all this time that she knew there was something different about her and that she knew that she didn't fit in, and now she knew why. It's also now very easy to find other people on the spectrum, because other people with autism are on the same wavelength, tend to get along better than neurotypical people do. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, it develops when the mother consumes alcohol while pregnant. And a lot of times people think that this is obvious because there's facial deformities. There can be facial deformities. There are not always facial deformities. And when I was working with substance use, I saw a lot of people who had undiagnosed fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. They also have a really hard time socializing with people, but it's the opposite of what you see with autism, because while an autistic person is going to be withdrawn in the crowd, somebody with fetal alcohol is going to be overly social. They're going to stand too close to you. They're going to be telling you about their most personal stories, and you're kind of going, wait a minute, I just met you 5 minutes ago. They're going to be overly friendly with you, and you're just kind of going, whoa, what's going on with this person? And they also tend to get mad really easily, blow up, and then 5 minutes later, they're calmed down. They do not even remember that they just blew up at you, and you're going, dude, what's going on with this person? And they're just like, why are you mad at me? They really don't remember that they just blew up at you. So getting tested, screened, it can help with employment. Department of Rehabilitative Services can help a bit with that. And in the autism community, they're starting to get some organization going for employment, get counseling for socialization, or even find other people who are dealing with the same conditions. So that is what I have. Does anyone have any questions?
How prevalent is that FASD?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I'm trying to think of the crazy people
I'm not even really that sure. And it's one of those, really started to get noticed in the 1970s, so it's a fairly recent, until the 1970s, they didn't think that alcohol could pass through the placenta and damage a fetus. And so it's really only recently that there's been research, so I'm not sure. That's a good question.
It seems like a lot of communication is nonverbal, and that the autism spectrum disorder people have difficulty sometimes because of this mind blind. You know, they're looking at the person, but they can't really interpret these cues as to how the other person's feeling. And it just seems to me that in the modern age now, there's so much communication where that's screened off. Telephone, internet, email. How does that affect communication, and is that maybe part of the reason why our society seems to be so impersonal and so many people are on Prozac because they just don't feel like they're really connecting with people.
So, with regards to communicating online, the interesting thing is pretty much autistic people were the pioneers in that. And before you had the computers and the internet, you had ham radio. And autistic people were the pioneers of that. And for autistic people, it was easier to communicate with others on this medium because they didn't have to worry about the nonverbal communication. And it was the same when things went to the internet. They didn't have to worry about the nonverbal. Now we've got the emoticons, but I do think that a lot of context does get stripped away when things get on the internet. And I think it's really easy to think that everything that somebody posts is a personal reaction to us. We're very egocentric. As far as depression, I think there's several factors going on there. I think that we do feel more estranged from social networks. I don't really know any of my neighbors. Things are moving to online, and there is, the good part of that is people from small communities, online has been really instrumental in helping atheists connect with each other. However, when we're in a crisis, say somebody has cancer in their family, somebody who lives 18 hours away in Wisconsin can't come over and give you a casserole. So we're losing some of that benefit that we get from having a social network, and I think that does lead to depression. And then, of course, with screen time, that the light from screens affects the hormones that helps us to sleep, so we're not getting as good sleep as we used to. And if you look at the correlation between sleep and depression, it's a really strong correlation. If you have depression, you have a problem sleeping. Finally, I think medication is important with mental disorders, but I think too often it's considered a first resort. And aside from severe cases such as schizophrenia, it needs to be a last resort after we've tried some behavioral changes, such as improving the quality of somebody's sleep. But because behavioral innovations are more timely, they cost more, and insurance companies would rather pay for a pill. So I think that's a complex one.
Do these modern internet and all that, is that contributing to hostility? I mean, flame wars and people being trolls and just saying and treating other people online in a way that we just don't see people treating each other face to face.
I'm not sure if it's that or if it's making it more visible. I was bullied horrendously in school before the internet came on. If you talk, there's a lot of stories from news archives of people of racism in the South, people who are lynched and stuff. And if you even look in the history of politics, you find that there's one time one legislator beat another one in the White House. So I'm not sure if things are really getting more ugly or if it's just that we are more aware of it because we see it more now. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, if you've got wallpaper on your desktop, you spend a lot of time in front of the computer, you're just saying we should change that to warmer colors so that we can sleep better?
See, I'm not sure that would work so much. It's the light itself that the screen submits.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's not so much what's on our wallpaper, but it's, kind of our biology evolved to go with the night and day cycles for most people, and the light tricks our body into thinking that it's earlier than it is.
So in the very beginning of your presentation, you get a slide where, you know, it says, when we're communicating, we're trying to get other people to agree with us. And really, what should be our intention in communicating?
Ooh.
Is that- I don't know, I have trouble with that, because like, I guess my Christian Bible thumping past, you know, I would want to witness and convert people, and so I've always wanted them to agree with me. But now this is like the scientific approach in my mind anyways, is to be disinterested in the outcome and becoming more emotionally intelligent, just connecting with that person. Needs to be,
I think there's connecting, and then I think there's understanding. And trying to understand where the other person is coming from. And when you're speaking, I think it's, you know, I know when I speak in the hopes that people will understand what I am saying. They might not agree with me, but they understand where I'm coming from, if that makes sense.
Seems to me what Tim was saying, you know, about the business about online being more exposed. Because there's many people I see that were one-on-one, nobody else sees about the two people involved with this program like everything. It's not open to the public, whereas online is open to the public. So it makes it a lot worse because it's open.
Pretty much, yeah. If you got into a disagreement with somebody in the privacy of your own home, nobody's gonna know, but if you get in an online flame war with somebody, the whole world knows.
And you have to win because you're performing.
Mhm. Yeah, you can't lose face. So,
Even on Facebook.
yeah, especially on Facebook.
What's the range in age of your patient? And you know the sort of relation between how easy it is to fix someone at an earlier age as opposed to older?
So I have worked with 4-year-olds to, I want to say he was 70. So I've gone through the ages. Definitely in childhood, that early intervention helps. There is much easier, prevention is much easier than fixing somebody who is broken. Getting a child out of a violent environment is, and teaching that child that violence is not okay is a lot easier than dealing with an adult who survived a violent environment saying, well, so that my parents beat me and I turned out okay. When they've been to jail, you know, how many times, they can't hold down a job, and they've got a charge against them for beating their wife. So it's a lot, early intervention is a lot easier, however, it's not hopeless for adults. So it just takes a lot longer to undo the damage and heal.
It's not about communication, I'm thinking, sometimes people have a bad childhood and subject to bad parenting. Some of them came out okay, and the others go downhill. So I'm thinking there is something that we bring to this world that helps us or decides where we go, up or down.
So there's a trait called resilience. And resilience is it's something that we're born with. There is definitely a genetic component to this. And some people have more resilience than others. Now, if you put somebody who is very resilient and they grew up in a loving environment, they're probably going to do better than somebody who's very resilient and grew up in an abusive environment. But just because you grew up in an abusive environment doesn't mean you can't be successful. You can. There are lots of people who do break the cycle because they have that resiliency. If a blog that's really interesting with this is Lovejoy Feminism, and she grew up in a very abusive Christian household and she has a lot of resilience, and she's breaking the cycle. And she talks a lot about how she wonders what would have been different if she had not been beaten growing up as a child. So
It does probably slow down that even if the child has resilience, if it's an abusive environment, may get out of it and become a positive person, but it probably slow down his or her improvement group, success in life.
And, yeah, a lot of parenting, I will say, is communicating, and it's also very hard communicating because you're having to figure out how to get a child who doesn't have language development to figure out the world. So there is a lot of communication with parenting. And one of the things that she says is when, she goes into a job and has a boss who does something that reminds her of something her parents do, it's really triggering for her and really anxiety producing for her. So, yeah.
I think you mentioned earlier that you said some or a lot or something of atheists or free thinkers are on the autism spectrum. How does one get, how does one assess that?
So pretty much find a psychologist, and you have to go in for testing, or contact DARS, Department of Rehabilitative Services, and to go in for testing there.
Is that cost anything?
Different insurance, DARS is free. I don't know about the income requirements for DARS, let me back up. But as for psychological testing, that's different insurance companies, don't get me started on there though. Different insurance companies, I don't know what it would be, there's so much variability.
I wouldn't be surprised if there are online tools, or obviously you want to go to someplace that's reputable, but kind of by answering questions and so forth. Do you know if that's actually been worked out, that atheists are more likely to have that kind of relating problems, or is that just, because I think we all realize that to be an atheist, you have to have a certain amount of not caring what other people think, to quote Richard Feynman. Whereas a lot of believers seem to be like, they don't even want to talk about it because they're in this group, it's their church, and they're accepted, and they don't want to take a step outside of that because it's satisfactory for them.
So, there is a relationship. More atheists than normal are on the autism spectrum, in the general population are in the autism spectrum, and more autistics are also atheists than in the general population. Not every person with autism is an atheist, and not every atheist has autism though, so it's not a solid.
But it's been studied.
Yeah.
Been able to document that.
They have documented it, and now the research is going into why, and I think the research, there's a lot of strengths that people with autism have that I think are overlooked. And the research was focusing on the fact that, the incorrect fact that atheists don't have a theory, that autistics don't have a theory of mind. Adults with autism do have a theory of mind. But I do agree with you that people with autism aren't likely to care about, they're not likely to let society influence what they think and do. And I think that contributes more to the questioning of authority figures, and I think that's a strength that people with autism have. So, yeah.
Part of it depends on the level. I think part of it is that they don't have much understanding for abstract concepts of God. And they might be thinking, God, what God, where? What is it, show me? But they may not verbalize it. Well, it's your information, I had autistic child. And I don't think he gets it. He His biggest issue is social interaction. When he was little, in elementary school, and I don't think they did get it at that time, that being alone and not having any interaction with anybody was a reward to him. So when he misbehaved, they put him in a corner. And he was very comfortable there, he's happy. And then he said, okay, time out is over, he can come out, he'd come and just clear the teacher said, when he said, time out, and put himself time out. And when he had that time, thinking,